Welcome to the Daily Report, where real stories meet thoughtful analysis.
When the truth behind a film set begins to surface, the story often turns into something far larger than anyone expected. What began as a straightforward production on It Ends With Us gradually evolved into a conflict shaped by private conversations, sealed filings, and shifting narratives among three central figures: Justin Baldoni, Blake Lively, and Ryan Reynolds. As new evidence entered the public record, familiar public images collided with testimony and documented interactions that suggested a far more complicated story. In the earliest stages, Blake Lively appeared positioned as the person seeking clarity and protection, but the filings introduced a different picture. Portions of Justin Baldoni's deposition, combined with evidence labeled with Blake's initials and sealed attachments marked RR subpoena, hinted at communication and involvement beyond the public understanding. What unfolded was no longer simply a dispute on a film set. It became a story involving improvised choices during filming, private discussions away from the cameras, and the growing influence of Ryan Reynolds within moments that would later become central to the case. As documents surfaced, the distance between the public narrative and the recorded evidence continued to widen. And soon, the case turned toward the sealed files that did not yet reveal their contents, but already held enormous weight. Sometimes the most revealing evidence is the evidence no one is allowed to see. Among the hundreds of documents filed, a set labeled RR subpoena drew immediate attention. These attachments contain text messages sent by Ryan Reynolds on several significant dates surrounding the production and premiere of It Ends With Us. Although sealed from public view, the timing and classification strongly suggested that the messages related directly to the growing tension between Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively. The pages referenced dates that aligned with critical points of conflict, including the days just before the film's premiere. The sealed messages remain inaccessible, yet their presence raised important questions. What prompted Ryan to send them? To whom were they directed? And how do they influence the broader story of what unfolded? Blake Lively's team never addressed the sealed contents directly. Instead, they filed a new document, one that included Ryan's name beside Blake's. Observers immediately noted that the filing arrived just after Baldoni's side released extensive evidence. Yet the filing added no new clarity. Entire sections were redacted, offering almost no substantive information. The timing suggested a strategic attempt to redirect the narrative, but the lack of detail only deepened curiosity about the content within the sealed RR attachments. And soon, attention shifted to a moment that required no interpretation, an encounter inside the penthouse of Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds, where the story took a dramatic turn. Behind closed doors, conversations can reshape an entire story. One meeting described in the filings stands out as a pivotal moment, a gathering inside the penthouse shared by Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds. What began as a conversation about concerns on set became, according to accounts, an emotionally overwhelming confrontation for Justin Baldoni. Baldoni and members of his team were invited to discuss Blake's comfort before filming resumed. But once inside, the tone changed. Witness statements and later messages described Ryan Reynolds directing intense criticism at Baldoni for hours. In a message to his team afterward, Baldoni called the experience an ambush. He wrote that he struggled to speak, unable to form sentences as accusations were read to him from a phone. The words creepy and abuse were used, language that left him stunned, confused, and emotionally paralyzed. The confrontation reportedly continued for 4 to 5 hours, long beyond the length of a conversation meant to resolve concerns. The impact lingered long after Baldoni left the penthouse, affecting how he approached the set and altering the dynamic between the three central figures. This encounter raised an immediate question: what prompted such an intense reaction from Ryan Reynolds? The answer became even more complicated once deposition details revealed a moment during filming that was never written into the script. Sometimes the smallest moment on camera becomes the most important piece of evidence. Deep within Justin Baldoni's deposition was a detail with profound implications: an improvised kiss initiated by Blake Lively, a kiss that did not appear in any version of the script for It Ends With Us. According to Baldoni, Blake added the kiss spontaneously, without discussion, and despite previously established boundaries restricting physical interaction, the moment directly contradicted early claims that suggested discomfort around Baldoni's conduct. The contradiction intensified when footage showed Blake's makeup artist, Vivian Baker, approaching Baldoni voluntarily to initiate a hug. Despite testimony implying discomfort with that very behavior, the deposition made it clear many of the interactions on set were not initiated by Baldoni, but by others. Together, the improvised kiss and the voluntary interactions shown in the video challenged the foundation of the narrative initially presented by Blake's legal team. Instead of supporting allegations about boundaries being crossed, the evidence painted a different picture, one where actions on set did not align with the concerns raised afterward. And as the contradictions grew, attention returned once more to Ryan Reynolds, whose silence in the courtroom held a significance of its own. Silence can reveal as much as testimony, especially when the stakes are personal. Despite recurring references to him in the sealed filings, Ryan Reynolds is not expected to testify. Taking the stand would require revealing private details about his marriage, his conversations with Blake, and the moments surrounding the penthouse confrontation. It would also place his reactions under direct legal scrutiny. Testifying would make private discussions part of the public record. These include questions about why production continued, why no formal complaints were filed at the time, and what Ryan communicated in the messages listed under RR subpoena. Remaining silent shields those details from exposure, but also creates gaps in the timeline. The story must instead be assembled from partial transcripts, redacted pages, and the testimony of others who were present. This absence shaped the narrative just as strongly as any statement could. And while Ryan remained silent, the public began to shift its attention, watching digital signs that suggested a struggle for control over public perception. When public opinion shifts too quickly, the digital footprints become impossible to ignore. As filings gained attention, unusual online activity appeared around Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds. Follower counts that had been steadily declining suddenly surged dramatically, gaining tens of thousands overnight. The next day, the numbers dropped again. The sudden spikes did not match typical audience behavior and raised speculation about attempts to influence public perception. At the same time, a TMZ poll, where over 90% of respondents sided with Justin Baldoni, vanished from the platform without explanation. Its disappearance, combined with the irregular follower patterns, created a sense of coordinated narrative management. The numbers did not change the evidence, but they highlighted how the story extended far beyond the courtroom. It became a battle not just over facts, but over public trust. And soon, another filing from Blake and Ryan added a new layer to the unfolding drama, one that raised more questions than answers. When a new filing arrives at the height of public doubt, its timing becomes as important as its content. Not long after Baldoni's evidence was released, Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds submitted a new filing to the court. The filing immediately attracted attention for its high number of redactions. Entire paragraphs were blacked out, leaving only vague references to previously dismissed claims. Observers questioned the purpose of the document, including Ryan's name ensured media attention, but the filing offered no concrete evidence to support its implications. Crucially, the case it referenced had already been dismissed months earlier, making the sudden appearance feel misaligned with the facts. Rather than challenging Baldoni's evidence directly, the filing appeared to shift focus, an attempt to redirect the narrative at a moment when public sentiment was turning. Yet, even as the filing circulated, the most revealing information came from the deposition room, where inconsistencies began to break apart parts of Blake's story. In deposition rooms, truth often reveals itself through the smallest inconsistencies. During Justin Baldoni's deposition, Blake's attorneys pressed him on a supposed culture of hugging on set. They attempted to suggest that his behavior blurred professional boundaries. But Baldoni clarified that many of the hugs were initiated by others, and that Vivian Baker, the makeup artist who reportedly felt uncomfortable, was often the one to approach him first. This statement contradicted the earlier narrative and was reinforced by video evidence showing multiple crew members initiating friendly interactions with Baldoni. Faced with contradictions, the line of questioning shifted abruptly. The argument that the set environment created discomfort became increasingly difficult to maintain when the footage showed otherwise. This moment in the deposition marked a turning point. It exposed a gap between the claims made and the documented reality. Yet the most significant contradiction still centered on the improvised kiss, an action that carried implications for the entire case. Sometimes a single moment on set can reshape the entire narrative. The improvised kiss initiated by Blake Lively became one of the most consequential details in the filings. It contradicted earlier claims about discomfort, boundaries, and Baldoni's conduct. Blake had established strict limits regarding physical interaction, yet the kiss, added without script direction or discussion, challenged the very foundation of those limits. It raised questions about consistency and intention. For Baldoni's team, the moment served as key evidence. It demonstrated that the narrative presented by Blake's side did not align with the events recorded during filming. Combined with other footage showing voluntary interactions, the improvised kiss became a central contradiction. And as this contradiction surfaced, attention turned again to Ryan Reynolds, whose silence took on deeper meaning with every new revelation. Sometimes the person who says the least becomes the most important part of the story. Despite being named throughout the filings and referenced in sealed documents, Ryan Reynolds remains absent from testimony. His decision not to testify preserves the privacy of his marriage, his conversations, and his reactions. During the most tense periods of production, testifying would require addressing the penthouse confrontation, the sealed RR messages, and Blake's shifting account of the events. It would also require explaining why no formal reports were filed at the time of the incidents now described in the case. His silence avoids these exposures, but leaves a noticeable void in the narrative. Without his testimony, the story relies on incomplete documents, partial accounts, and the sworn statements of others. As questions continued to grow, public attention shifted to the ways perception was being shaped, both in the courtroom and online. When public reaction changes faster than the story itself, the digital footprints become impossible to ignore. The sudden spikes in social media followers, the disappearance of polling results, and the shifting tone of headlines revealed how public narratives can be influenced in subtle ways. These patterns did not answer the deeper questions within the case, but they highlighted the growing pressure surrounding Blake and Ryan's public image. At a time when evidence and testimony began to conflict with earlier claims, the digital shifts added a new dimension to the unfolding story, one where perception became as important as fact. And behind these shifts, accounts from those present on set raised a further contradiction: the stark difference in Blake Lively's behavior depending on who was in the room. What happens behind the scenes often reveals more than any public statement. Reports from those present describe two versions of Blake Lively. When Ryan Reynolds was nearby, Blake appeared reserved, cautious, and careful with her words. But when he was absent, she reportedly became more assertive, outspoken, and difficult for some to approach. These contrasting behaviors complicated the narrative around discomfort and boundaries. They raised questions about the influence of Ryan's presence, the dynamics of their relationship, and how those dynamics affected the version of events later shared in filings. The improvised kiss, the voluntary interactions on video, and the shifting behavior all challenged the consistency of the claims being made, and these contradictions led directly into the final question, one centered on the evidence the public has not yet seen. In every controversy, the documents that remain sealed often hold the final answer. The conflict involving Justin Baldoni, Blake Lively, and Ryan Reynolds now rests in a space between what has been revealed and what remains hidden. Deposition excerpts, video evidence, and shifting narratives have reshaped public understanding, exposing contradictions and raising new questions. The penthouse confrontation, the improvised kiss, the sealed RR subpoena messages, the sudden digital shifts, and the contrasting behaviors on set all paint a picture far more complex than the one first presented. Justin Baldoni's account shows a story of emotional pressure, unexpected accusations, and a deeply affecting confrontation. Blake Lively's actions on set, captured in video moments and contradicted by testimony, challenge the consistency of her claims. Ryan Reynolds' silence protects his privacy, but leaves unanswered questions within the record. For now, the fullest truth remains locked within the sealed evidence, documents labeled BL, LS, and RR subpoena that the public has not yet been allowed to see. And if those files are ever unsealed, they may rewrite everything known so far.